My life, up until Leo walked into it, felt pretty much like a well-defined equation. Predictable, a little tedious, and with very few variables I hadn't already accounted for. I was Alexander, 18, on the cusp of university, and drowning in advanced calculus. My future was supposed to be clear: an engineering degree, a stable career, maybe a quiet house with a garden someday. The only problem was, my current path had a giant, insurmountable wall called differential equations, and my grades were plummeting faster than a free-falling object. "Alexander, we really need to address this math situation," my mom said one evening, her voice laced with that particular blend of concern and exasperation that only mothers can perfect. We were at the dinner table, a rare moment of family unity, but even that couldn't escape the shadow of my academic woes. My dad just nodded, swirling his wine. He was more of a fix-it kind of guy, and right now, I was the broken thing. I pushed a pea around my plate. "I'm trying, Mom. It just doesn't click." It was true. I'd spent countless hours staring at textbooks, watching online tutorials, trying to decode the abstract logic, but it was like my brain simply refused to process it. Numbers, letters, symbols, they just swam together in a meaningless soup. "Your counselor suggested a private tutor," Dad interjected, his voice practical. "Someone who can break it down, one-on-one." My stomach did a little flip. A tutor? It felt like an admission of absolute defeat. I'd always been a decent student, never needing extra help before. This felt infantilizing, like I couldn't handle things on my own. "I don't know, Dad. I can probably figure it out if I just try harder." "You've been saying that for 2 months, honey," Mom said gently, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze mine. "And your last test score says otherwise. Let's just try it. We found someone highly recommended, a post-grad student from the university. He's apparently brilliant." Brilliant, great, just what I needed. Another reminder of how utterly lost I was. "Fine," I sighed, resignation heavy in my chest. "When does this brilliant person start?" "This Saturday," Dad said, pulling out his phone. "Leo Maxwell. He'll be here at 10. The name itself sounded competent, efficient. I imagined a stern, spectacled academic, probably about 25, who would look at my struggles with a weary, knowing gaze. I braced myself for the intellectual humiliation. Saturday morning arrived, gray and drizzly. I spent an hour trying to make my room look less like a war zone and more like a study space, shoving dirty clothes into a hamper and stacking textbooks into semi-neat piles. My calculus book lay open on my desk, taunting me with its incomprehensible diagrams. The doorbell chimed precisely at 10. My heart thumped a little faster. Mom was already at the door, her welcoming smile plastered on. I heard muffled voices, then footsteps approaching my room. I took a deep breath, trying to project an air of studious readiness. "Alexander, this is Leo," Mom announced, poking her head in. I looked up, and my breath hitched, just a little. He wasn't at all what I'd pictured. Leo Maxwell stood in my doorway, and the gray Saturday instantly felt brighter. He was taller than I'd expected, lean, but with an athletic grace. His hair was a rich, dark brown, falling just slightly over his forehead in a way that looked effortlessly cool. But it was his eyes that really got me. A warm, intelligent hazel, crinkling at the corners, as he offered a friendly smile. He couldn't have been much older than 22 or 23, dressed casually in a soft gray Henley shirt and dark jeans, looking more like someone you'd run into at a coffee shop than a math wizard. "Hi, Alexander. It's good to meet you," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that was surprisingly soothing. He extended a hand, and I found myself taking it, his grip firm and warm. "You too, Leo," I managed, feeling suddenly acutely aware of my slightly rumpled t-shirt and the blush that I knew was creeping up my neck. My stern, spectacled, academic fantasy had been utterly, gloriously shattered. Mom bustled off, leaving us alone. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but rather expectant. Leo's gaze was gentle, patient. He didn't seem to judge my disarray or my obvious nerves. So, calculus, huh? He finally said, gesturing towards the open textbook. He walked further into the room, pulling out a chair opposite my desk. He moved with a quiet confidence that was disarming. Yeah, I mumbled, gesturing vaguely at the book. It's not my strong suit. He chuckled softly. Don't worry, you're not alone. A lot of people find calculus a bit intimidating at first. It's a different way of thinking, but I promise you, it's not impossible. We just need to find the right way for your brain to understand it. The way he said your brain made it feel personal, collaborative, not like I was just another student to be fixed. He wasn't talking down to me. For the next 2 hours, Leo patiently guided me through the thorny thickets of derivatives and integrals. He didn't just rattle off formulas, he explained the why behind them, using analogies that actually made sense. He talked about rates of change like the speed of a car and accumulated sums like filling a bathtub. His explanations were clear, concise, and delivered with an easy enthusiasm that was infectious. He'd watch my face as he explained a concept, his hazel eyes keenly observing whether I was grasping it. If he saw even a flicker of confusion, he'd rephrase, try a different angle, or draw a diagram with a steady, practiced hand. He brought his own whiteboard markers and a small, portable whiteboard, which made the whole process feel more dynamic than just staring at a page. There was one moment, about an hour in, where I finally understood a concept that had eluded me for weeks. The chain rule. It wasn't a huge breakthrough, but it felt monumental. A light bulb literally went off in my head. "Oh, I get it," I exclaimed, my voice a little louder than intended, leaning forward in my chair. Leo smiled, a genuine, wide smile that lit up his whole face. "See, I told you it wasn't impossible. It's just about finding that one connection." His smile was really nice. It made me feel a strange warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with finally understanding math. As we worked, I found myself studying him, almost without realizing it. The way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way he tapped his pen lightly against his chin when thinking. The subtle scent of something clean and outdoorsy, like fresh air and pine, that seemed to emanate from him. He had a small silver ring on his index finger, slightly worn, and his hands were surprisingly elegant as he wrote out equations. We took a short break for water, and that's when the conversation shifted, subtly, from academics to something more personal. "So, what do you like to do when you're not wrestling with calculus?" Leo asked, leaning back in his chair, taking a sip from his water bottle. His gaze was curious, open. Well, I play a bit of guitar," I said, feeling a little self-conscious. "Not professionally or anything, just for myself." "Oh, really? What kind of music?" His eyes lit up. "Alternative rock, indie stuff, bands like The Killers, Arctic Monkeys, some older stuff like Radiohead," I listed. "No way!" Leo sat up straight, a genuine grin spreading across his face. "Radiohead? I love Radiohead. In Rainbows is probably one of my all-time favorite albums. You know Reckoner?" "Are you kidding? That's a masterpiece," I said, feeling a surge of excitement. It was unexpected, this shared interest. My friends mostly listened to rap or pop. No one I knew really got Radiohead the way I did. "Totally," he agreed, nodding. "The instrumentation, Tom York's voice, it's just pure genius. What about new music? Anything you're into lately?" We talked about music for a good 15 minutes, exchanging recommendations, debating album merits. It was easy, comfortable, and completely distracting from the math that still lay ahead. He listened intently, not just politely, but as if genuinely interested in my opinions. He even hummed a few bars of a song I mentioned, his voice surprisingly melodic. "Okay, enough procrastinating," he finally said with a mock-serious sigh, though his eyes were still twinkling. "Back to the numbers. But that's cool, Alexander. Always good to know your student has excellent taste in music." I actually laughed. It felt good, lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The idea of him thinking I had excellent taste was a novel one. We continued for another hour, and by the time Leo packed up his things, my head wasn't swimming with confusion anymore. It was still a lot, but I felt a glimmer of hope. More importantly, I felt a strange sense of disappointment that he was leaving. All right, so you've got a few practice problems to work on before next week, he said, handing me a sheet he'd prepared. And if you get stuck, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I check it regularly. Thanks, Leo. Really, I think I understood some of that, I admitted, a genuine smile replacing my earlier reluctance. He returned it, his hazel eyes crinkling again. That's the goal, Alexander. Keep at it. You've got this. He slung his bag over his shoulder. See you next Saturday? As he walked out, his steps light and confident, I watched him go, and once he was out of sight, I found myself replaying not just the math explanations, but the easy conversations, the shared laughter over Radiohead, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about something he was passionate about. That night, I actually opened my calculus book and tried some of the practice problems, and to my astonishment, I got a few right. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was progress. More than that, though, I kept thinking about Leo. His presence had been so calming, so inherently kind. It wasn't just that he was a good teacher, it was the entire package. The way he made me feel seen, not just as a struggling student, but as a person. Over the next few days, I found myself looking forward to Saturday with an eagerness I hadn't felt for anything academic in a long time. It wasn't just the math, though I genuinely wanted to improve. It was the prospect of seeing Leo again. It was a new kind of variable in my life's equation, one I hadn't anticipated, and frankly, didn't entirely understand. My friends noticed a shift in me. You seem less stressed about math, dude, Mark, my best friend, observed during our lunch break at school. Did that tutor work some magic? I shrugged, trying to play it cool. He's good, explains things well, makes it less terrifying. I didn't elaborate on the other aspects, the unexpected spark of connection, the way my stomach fluttered when I thought about his smile. Those feelings felt too personal, too new, and honestly a little embarrassing to articulate. I hadn't really processed them myself. It was just a tutor, after all. A really, really attractive tutor. The second session was even better than the first. Leo arrived, punctual as ever, carrying a small thermos of coffee this time. Morning, he greeted, his voice bright. Ready to tackle some more math? Ready as I'll ever be, I said, a genuine smile on my face. The initial shyness was still there, a faint hum beneath my skin, but it was overshadowed by a growing comfort. We dove into applications of derivatives, and Leo brought in real-world examples that made the abstract concepts tangible. He talked about optimizing the design of a bridge or calculating the maximum efficiency of an engine. His passion for the subject was evident, and it made even the most complex problems feel less daunting. What struck me was how attentive he was, not just to my answers, but to my process. He'd let me struggle a little, then gently nudge me in the right direction, never making me feel stupid for not grasping something immediately. He celebrated every small victory, every aha moment, as if it were his own. During a break, he noticed my guitar propped in the corner of my room. "Did you write any new riffs this week?" he asked, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "A few," I admitted, feeling a flush creep up my neck. I rarely showed anyone my own music. It felt too vulnerable. "Mind if I hear something?" he asked, a gentle encouragement in his tone. "Only if you're comfortable, of course." My first instinct was to say no, to deflect. But there was something in his gaze, a genuine interest, that made me hesitate. And the truth was, I wanted him to hear it. I wanted to share a part of myself that went beyond struggling with math. Okay, I said, my voice a little shaky. I picked up my acoustic guitar, tuning it quickly. My fingers felt clumsy, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was a completely different kind of performance anxiety. I played a short instrumental piece I'd been working on, a melancholic melody with a driving rhythm. It wasn't polished, but it was mine. My eyes were fixed on the fretboard, avoiding his gaze, but I could feel his presence, his focused attention. When I finished, the silence stretched, and I braced myself for polite criticism, or worse, indifference. Instead, Leo slowly clapped, a soft, appreciative sound. Wow, Alexander, that was really good. Seriously, there's a real depth to that melody. Did you compose it yourself? I nodded, feeling a wave of relief and a ridiculous warmth spread through me. Yeah, still figuring out the bridge, though. Well, for someone just playing for yourself, you've got some serious talent, he said, his smile genuine. You should keep at it. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't be good at more than one thing. His words resonated deeply. It felt like he was seeing another dimension of me, acknowledging a part I usually kept hidden. It wasn't just about math anymore. It was about me, Alexander, the person who struggled with numbers but found solace in music. That afternoon, after he left, the lingering scent of his coffee and something else, something uniquely him, felt comforting in my room. I found myself humming the melody I'd played for him, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, not just for my math, but for my music too. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Every Saturday, Leo would arrive, and for 3 hours, we'd delve into the intricacies of advanced calculus. And every session, we'd carve out time for non-math conversations. We talked about university life, his experiences as a student, the challenges of balancing studies with a social life. He was studying applied mathematics and physics, a combination that frankly blew my mind with its complexity. He talked about his research, his fascination with theoretical concepts, and the beauty he found in the underlying structure of the universe. I found myself hanging on his every word, not just because he was handsome, which he unequivocally was, but because he was genuinely interesting. He had a way of explaining complex ideas, whether mathematical or philosophical, that made them accessible and exciting. He was intelligent without being arrogant, confident without being dismissive. He listened actively, responding thoughtfully to my questions and opinions, making me feel like my thoughts mattered. I started to notice little things about him: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the slight tilt of his head when he was deep in thought, the way he'd absent-mindedly twirl his pen between his fingers, the slight stubble that sometimes shadowed his jaw, hinting at a ruggedness beneath his polished exterior. He wore a different t-shirt or Henley every week, always in muted, earthy tones that seemed to suit him. I even started to subconsciously adjust my own clothing choices on Saturdays, wanting to look a little more put together for him. My grades started to improve, slowly but steadily. The math wasn't as terrifying anymore. It was still challenging, but now I had a guide, someone who made the journey less solitary. But the math was almost secondary to the feelings that were blooming inside me, subtle and bewildering. I'd never really thought much about my sexuality. Girls were fine. I'd had a few crushes in high school, dated one girl briefly, but it never felt like a profound connection. It was just what you did, what was expected. My friends talked about girls, obsessed over them, and I'd just nodded along, feeling a quiet disconnect. I never felt the same urgency, the same all-consuming desire. But with Leo, it was different. It wasn't a crush in the typical sense. It was a slow burn, a gradual realization that every time he smiled at me, every time his hand brushed mine as he pointed to an equation, every time he made eye contact and held it just a second longer than strictly necessary, a strange electric current would shoot through me. I started to dissect every interaction, every word, every gesture. Was that just him being friendly, professional, or was there something else? My mind, once so resistant to logical processes, was now meticulously analyzing every nuance of Leo's behavior. One afternoon, about a month into our sessions, we were reviewing some advanced trigonometry. I was struggling with an identity, my pen hovering over the paper in frustration. Leo leaned over my shoulder, his arm brushing mine, the warmth of his skin a sudden, distracting presence. "Think about it this way," he murmured, his voice low and close to my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "You can simplify this part first, and then it becomes much clearer." He took my pen gently from my hand, his fingers briefly closing over mine, and made a small adjustment to my notation. The contact was fleeting, barely there, but it felt like an earthquake. I could smell his scent again, closer this time. That fresh, piney, outdoorsy smell. It filled my senses, making it impossible to focus on the trigonometric identity. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to focus on the math, on the numbers, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. He straightened up, oblivious to the internal chaos he'd just unleashed. See, sometimes simplifying the complex parts first makes the whole problem less intimidating. Yeah, I managed, my voice a little hoarse. Yeah, that helps. Thanks. My hand, where his had touched mine, felt like it was tingling. That night, alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, the full weight of my burgeoning feelings crashed over me. It wasn't just admiration for his intelligence or gratitude for his patience. It was something deeper, something confusing and exhilarating. I wanted to be around him. I wanted to hear his voice, see his smile, feel that fleeting touch again. And that desire, that longing, felt different from anything I'd ever experienced for a girl. It felt real and undeniably directed at Leo. The realization hit me with the force of a sudden epiphany. I was attracted to Leo, my tutor, a man. And the thought, instead of terrifying me, settled in my gut with a quiet, undeniable rightness. It was a new variable, an unforeseen one, thrown into the predictable equation of my life, and it had completely redefined the entire problem set. But what did that even mean? He was my tutor. He was older. Was he even gay? I had no idea. He never mentioned relationships, never talked about personal life beyond his studies. He was always professional, albeit a warm and engaging professional. The thought of expressing any of these feelings, even hinting at them, was terrifying. It could ruin everything. The comfortable dynamic, my progress in math, the easy rapport we'd built. It felt like walking a tightrope over a very deep chasm. Still, the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing session. I found myself observing him more, trying to pick up on any subtle cues. Did he ever look at me a certain way? Did he linger a moment longer when saying goodbye? I felt like a detective, analyzing every piece of evidence, but ultimately finding nothing conclusive. He was consistently kind, patient, and professional. My parents were thrilled with my progress. "Leo's a miracle worker, Alexander," Mom declared one Sunday over brunch. "Your math teacher even called to say you're showing remarkable improvement. He said you're finally engaged with the material." I just smiled, picking at my pancakes. Engaged, yes. With the material, sure. But mostly I was engaged with the person teaching it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much Leo had already taught me beyond numbers. He'd taught me patience, perseverance, the joy of intellectual curiosity. He'd shown me that learning could be an exciting journey, not just a chore. He'd awakened a part of me that was hungry for understanding, not just in math, but in myself. And now he was unknowingly teaching me about something else entirely: desire, self-discovery, and the confusing, exhilarating landscape of attraction. It was a lesson I hadn't signed up for, but one I was increasingly desperate to understand. As the end of the term approached, and with it, the final exam that Leo was preparing me for, a new anxiety began to gnaw at me. Our sessions would end. What would happen then? Would I ever see him again? The thought of him simply disappearing from my life, becoming just a memory of a good tutor, filled me with a hollow ache. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the numbers, on the logic, but the feelings were like an unruly variable, refusing to be contained, twisting every equation into something new and unpredictable. My life, once so neatly defined, was now a beautiful, terrifying mess of unknowns, and the biggest unknown of all was Leo Maxwell. Our penultimate session arrived. The air felt heavy with unspoken implications, at least for me. Leo was going over past papers, his voice calm and reassuring. I tried to absorb every word, every nuance, not just of the math, but of him. "You've made incredible progress, Alexander," he said, reviewing one of my practice tests. "I genuinely think you're ready for this exam. You've put in the work, and it's paid off." A swell of pride mingled with a sharp pang of sadness. "Thanks, Leo. I couldn't have done it without you." And that was the absolute truth, on so many levels. He met my gaze, a soft, warm expression in his eyes. "You did the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction." He paused, then tilted his head slightly. "You know, it's been a real pleasure tutoring you, Alexander. You're a bright kid, and you've got a lot of potential, not just in academics." My heart did a somersault. "You think so?" "Definitely," he said, a sincere smile gracing his lips. "You have a good head on your shoulders and a unique way of looking at things. And," he added, his voice softening, "you're a pretty good guitarist." I blushed, feeling a wave of warmth. It meant so much to hear that from him. "Thanks, Leo. That means a lot." He picked up his markers, starting to pack them away. "Well, one more session next week, and then you'll be off to conquer that exam, and then off to university, right?" "Yeah," I said, the word catching in my throat. The "then" part felt like a looming cliff edge. My mind raced, searching for a way to extend this, to keep him in my life. But nothing came to me. What could I say? "Hey, now that I actually understand calculus, maybe you could tutor me in uh, advanced theoretical physics?" It sounded ridiculous. As he was about to leave, I found my voice a little shaky. "Leo, what are you doing after your postgrad?" It felt like a lame attempt, but it was all I had. He paused, turning back to me. "Well, I'm hoping to continue with my research. Maybe a PhD down the line, potentially teaching at the university eventually, if I'm lucky. Why?" "No reason," I mumbled, feeling foolish. "Just curious. Sounds impressive." He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "It's just the next step. Keep learning, keep exploring. That's the main thing, Alexander. Never stop being curious." He offered another one of his genuine smiles, then gave a slight nod. "See you next week, then." "Yeah," I said, a hollow echo. "Next week." As I watched him go, the full weight of the situation settled upon me. Next week, was it? Our last session. The final chapter of this unexpected, transformative period. And after that, he would be gone, and I would be left with calculus I could finally understand. And a heart full of emotions I couldn't. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a new equation, one with more variables than I knew how to solve, and the solution felt impossibly far away. The unforeseen variable, Leo, had indeed shown me more than just math. He'd shown me a part of myself I never knew existed, and now I had no idea how to proceed. The image of Liam's hand resting briefly on my textbook that afternoon kept replaying in my mind. It was a fleeting moment, a casual gesture as he pointed out a tricky inequality. But the warmth I'd imagined radiating from his fingertips had stayed with me, a phantom imprint on the page, and more deeply, on my awareness. It was ridiculous, I knew, to dissect something so innocuous, but then everything about Liam felt charged with a different kind of energy lately. The way he'd paused, mid-explanation, to catch my eye, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. The subtle scent of his cologne, something clean, a bit woody, utterly unlike the utilitarian smells of my dorm or lecture halls. I spent the evening trying to force myself back into the rhythm of my calculus homework, but my focus kept fracturing. Each integral sign seemed to morph into Liam's profile, each variable, a question mark about his thoughts. This wasn't just about struggling with a math concept anymore. It felt like I was struggling with an entirely new, complex equation within myself, one without a clear solution, and certainly not one I'd ever encountered in a textbook. A few days later, our next session rolled around. I'd dressed with a little more care than usual. A clean, well-fitting t-shirt, jeans that weren't quite so faded. I even bothered to run a comb through my perpetually messy hair, a futile effort, but it felt important. As I walked towards the campus library's study rooms, where we usually met, a nervous flutter started in my stomach. It wasn't the pre-test anxiety I knew so well. This was something softer, more insistent, like a new melody starting to play in my chest. Liam was already there, as always, setting up his notes. He looked up when I entered, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Alexander, right on time, ready to tackle some multivariate calculus? As I'll ever be, I managed, trying to sound casual, though my voice felt a bit rough. I settled into the chair opposite him, acutely aware of the small table separating us. The library was bustling, a low hum of chatter and rustling pages filling the air. Yet, in our little corner, it felt strangely intimate, like we were in our own bubble. He started by asking about my progress, if I'd hit any particular snags. I tried to articulate my difficulties with the latest concepts, but my mind felt oddly blank. It was hard to concentrate on the intricacies of partial derivatives when all I could think about was the way the light from the window caught the subtle flecks of gold in his warm brown eyes, or the way his sleeve was rolled up, revealing a strong forearm, a small faded scar just above his wrist. He was explaining something about gradient vectors, but my gaze kept drifting to his lips as he spoke, wishing I could focus on the words, but instead just listening to the sound of his voice. "Alexander?" he prompted, gently tilting his head. Did that make sense? I blinked, pulling myself back. Yes, completely. Just processing. I hoped my cheeks weren't as red as they felt. He gave me a knowing look, a hint of amusement in his eyes. It's a lot to take in. Why don't you try working through this problem? I'll be right here if you get stuck. He pushed a practice problem towards me, sliding his own pen across the table slightly, almost nudging mine. As I picked up my pen, my fingers brushed against the cool metal of his. A jolt, quick and subtle, went through me. I quickly pulled my hand back, mumbling an apology. He just smiled, a gentle, understanding smile that made my heart do a little flip. Did he feel it too? Or was I just projecting every fleeting sensation into some grand, romantic narrative? The latter seemed more likely. I was probably just a hormonal mess. We worked through the problem, and then another. He was patient, his explanations clear, breaking down complex ideas into manageable steps. But even as he talked about limits and continuity, he'd occasionally interject with something more personal. "How's your history paper coming along? I remember you mentioning it last week." Or, "Any plans for the weekend? Heard there's a new exhibit at the art museum that looks interesting." These small diversions were like unexpected gifts. They broke the academic rigidity, offering glimpses into a different kind of connection. I found myself opening up more, telling him about my struggles with academic writing, about my roommate's weird obsession with obscure documentaries, about my own vague plans to maybe explore the city this weekend. He listened intently, sometimes nodding, sometimes offering a small, encouraging comment that made me feel genuinely heard. By the time our hour was up, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. My brain was a little fried from the math, but my heart felt lighter, buoyed by the subtle shifts in our dynamic. "You made good progress today, Alexander," Liam said, packing up his things. "Keep practicing those triple integrals. They'll click." "I hope so," I replied, gathering my own books. "Thanks, Liam. Really. I meant it, for the math, yes, but for something else, too, something I couldn't quite articulate." As we both stood, there was a moment of awkward stillness. He met my gaze, and for a beat longer than necessary, his eyes held mine. There was something in them I couldn't quite decipher. A kindness, certainly, but perhaps a touch of something deeper, something equally unsaid. My breath hitched slightly. "Have a good weekend, Alexander," he finally said, breaking the spell, his voice soft. "You too, Liam," I managed, clutching my backpack straps a little too tight. I walked out of the library in a daze, the late afternoon sun feeling almost too bright. My head was buzzing, not from the calculus, but from the echoes of our conversation, the ghost of his touch, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between us. The next few days were a blur of restless energy. I tried to focus on my other classes, to hang out with my friends, but a part of me felt detached, as if watching my own life unfold from a distance. All I could think about was Liam. Was this a crush? It felt more intense than any fleeting attraction I'd ever experienced. It was an intellectual admiration, a quiet longing, a strange pull towards someone who felt both incredibly familiar and utterly mysterious. I started doing things I hadn't before. I'd find myself lingering in areas of campus where I might run into him, checking the faculty lounge schedule, just in case I saw his name on a meeting list, which was completely ridiculous, I know. I even started paying more attention to how I presented myself, not just for our sessions, but generally. It felt like I was subtly trying to signal something without actually knowing what that something was, or if it would even be received. One evening, I found myself in the common room, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. My roommate, Ben, was engrossed in a video game, headphones on, oblivious. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to talk to someone, to voice the swirling chaos in my head. But who? Ben was great, but our conversations usually revolved around game scores or what to order for takeout. This felt different, too personal, too vulnerable. I thought about my friend Chloe from high school. She was always good at listening, perceptive, but confessing something like this, a burgeoning, confusing attraction to my male tutor, felt like a monumental hurdle. I wasn't even sure I fully understood it myself. I'd always just existed. Relationships hadn't been a big thing for me. My focus was always on academics, on proving myself. This was a new territory, uncharted and a little terrifying. I ended up just journaling, pouring out my thoughts onto the page in a frantic scrawl. Why does he make me feel like this? Is it just because he's older, smart, attentive? Or is there something more? Do I even want there to be something more? What would that even look like? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last, leaving me feeling more confused than before. Our next session was scheduled for a Monday afternoon. The weather had turned, a sudden autumn chill in the air, bringing with it a fine, persistent drizzle. I arrived at the library, shaking off raindrops from my jacket, feeling a familiar mix of anticipation and nerves. Liam was already there, but this time he wasn't just setting up notes. He was looking out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face, holding a steaming mug. He turned when he heard me, offering that gentle smile that instantly calmed some of my jitters. "Hey, Alexander, awful weather, isn't it? I grabbed us some tea. Hope you like Earl Grey." He gestured to another mug on the table, steaming gently. My heart gave a little lurch. "Oh, wow. Thanks, Liam. That's really nice of you." I took the mug. The warmth seeped into my hands, a welcome comfort against the damp chill. No one had ever done something like that for me before. It was a small gesture, but it felt incredibly significant, a quiet act of care. "Thought it might help us brave the wonders of Taylor series expansions," he chuckled, taking a sip from his own mug. We settled into the math, but the presence of the tea, the shared warmth, softened the atmosphere. He still explained things with his usual clarity, but today there was an almost conversational rhythm to it. He'd ask me to explain my thought process, genuinely listening, sometimes interjecting with a leading question rather than just correcting me. At one point, as I was puzzling over a complex problem, I felt his gaze on me. I looked up, and he quickly averted his eyes, looking down at the textbook, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. Or maybe it was just the dim library light. My breath hitched. Was it possible? Could he feel even a fraction of what I was feeling? "You're doing well," he murmured, his voice a little lower than usual, almost a whisper. "You have a good grasp of the underlying principles. Just need to trust your intuition more." His words, simple as they were, resonated deeply. It wasn't just about math anymore. It felt like he was seeing something in me, something beyond the student struggling with calculus. He was seeing me. Towards the end of the session, as the library started to empty, a lull in the noise, he leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his tea. "So, Alexander," he began, his voice softer, more reflective, "you mentioned you were thinking about exploring the city this weekend. Did you end up going anywhere?" I shook my head. "No, didn't get around to it. got caught up with other assignments. I didn't mention that the other assignments mostly consisted of staring at my ceiling, contemplating the meaning of life and my feelings for him. He hummed thoughtfully. The city has some hidden gems, especially this time of year. There's a small independent bookstore downtown that does these incredible poetry readings on Friday nights, and a cafe next door with the best chai latte I've ever tasted. He paused, looking at me, a subtle invitation in his eyes. It's a nice way to unwind after a week of numbers and equations. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he suggesting something, or just making conversation? I tried to decipher the subtle nuances of his tone, the slight tilt of his head. My mind raced, trying to find the right words, something casual, something that wouldn't expose the raw vulnerability I felt. That sounds really interesting, I finally managed, my voice a little too eager. I actually really like poetry. It wasn't a lie. I did. I just hadn't thought about it in ages. He smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes. It is a good change of pace. You should check it out sometime. He didn't push, didn't make it an explicit invitation for us to go, but the way he'd said, "You should check it out," almost implying a shared understanding, made my imagination flare. "Maybe I will," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Thanks for the tip." The session ended, and we packed up our things. This time, as we stood, there wasn't that awkward silence. Instead, a comfortable quiet settled between us. As he slung his bag over his shoulder, he paused at the doorway. "You know, Alexander," he said, turning back to me, his gaze direct and earnest, "it's important to find balance. Don't let the pressures of academics consume everything. Life's meant to be lived, experienced. Explore those other interests, even the ones you might have forgotten." His words hung in the air, a gentle admonishment, but also something more profound. It felt like he was speaking directly to the turmoil within me, recognizing that my struggles weren't just with derivatives, but with finding my footing in a much larger, more confusing world. He was seeing past the student, acknowledging the person. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I will. Thanks, Liam, for everything." And again, the everything felt weighty, encompassing so much more than the math lessons. I watched him walk away, his figure receding into the bustling hallway, until he disappeared around a corner. I stood there for a long moment, the scent of Earl Grey still lingering in the air, his words echoing in my mind. He'd given me more than just math. He'd given me permission, in a way, to explore myself, to look beyond the rigid structures I'd always clung to. The next few days were consumed by a new kind of restlessness. His suggestion about the bookstore and the cafe kept replaying. Was it a hint? Was he trying to encourage me to explore things I liked, or was he subtly hinting that he might be there? My rational mind told me not to read too much into it. He was a tutor, a professional. He was being kind, encouraging, but the hopeful, yearning part of me wanted to believe there was something more. I considered going to the poetry reading. I even looked up the bookstore online. It looked cozy, exactly the kind of place Liam would like. But then doubt crept in. What if he wasn't there? What if he was there and I made a fool of myself? What if my presence made him uncomfortable? The thought of jeopardizing our sessions, the fragile, evolving connection we were building, was unbearable. So, I didn't go. I stayed in my dorm, trying to distract myself with a book, but my mind was elsewhere. I felt a pang of regret, a sense of having missed an opportunity, but also a quiet relief. I wasn't ready to push those boundaries yet, not without more certainty. Our next session was later that week. I walked in feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I had a long list of specific questions, determined to prove to myself, and perhaps to him, that I was a dedicated student. Liam was in his usual spot, but today he looked a little different. There was a subtle tiredness around his eyes, and he held his mug with both hands, as if seeking comfort. "Hey, Alexander," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. "Rough week on campus, it seems. Lots of colds going around." I nodded. Yeah, I've heard. You okay? He gave a small, wry smile. Just a bit under the weather. Nothing a good dose of Fourier series can't fix, right? I chuckled, but my heart went out to him. He was always so put together, so calm. Seeing him a little vulnerable, a little less than perfect, made him feel even more real, more human. We delved into the math, but I found myself observing him more closely. He cleared his throat frequently, and his explanations were a little less energetic. He kept rubbing his temples, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about his discomfort. Liam, I ventured, interrupting his explanation of a complex theorem, are you sure you're okay to do this? We can reschedule if you need to. The words tumbled out before I could censor them, driven by a genuine concern that surprised even myself. He stopped, his pen hovering over the page. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then a soft, appreciative smile. That's very thoughtful of you, Alexander, but I'm fine, just a little worn out. You don't look fine, I said, perhaps a little too bluntly. You look like you need to go home and rest. Really, it's okay. My voice was filled with a sincerity that felt almost overwhelming. He paused, considering my words. The professional facade seemed to waver for a moment. He ran a hand through his hair, a small sigh escaping him. You know, he admitted, his voice a little hoarse. You might be right. I was hoping to push through, but my head's starting to spin a bit. Then don't push through, I urged, leaning forward. Take care of yourself. He looked at me, a long, searching gaze that seemed to peel back all my layers. It wasn't the look of a tutor evaluating a student. It was the look of one person genuinely seeing another. Thank you, Alexander, he said softly, a genuine warmth in his voice. I appreciate that. He started gathering his things, a little slower than usual. Let's call it a day, then. I'll email you to reschedule for next week. I felt a rush of something. Relief that he was taking care of himself, but also a strange sense of accomplishment. I had pushed past my usual shyness, my student role, and offered genuine care. And he had accepted it. As we both stood, he reached for his water bottle, and his hand brushed mine again, this time a more deliberate, lingering contact. His fingers, cool and slightly clammy, rested against my palm for a beat too long. My breath hitched. He didn't pull away immediately. He just looked at me, his eyes clouded slightly with fatigue, but also with an intensity I hadn't seen before. Take care of yourself too, Alexander, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. Don't burn yourself out trying to solve all the world's problems, or all of my problems. He gave a weak smile, then finally, gently, withdrew his hand. I felt a tremor go through me, a quiet current that settled deep in my chest. I won't, I promised, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, then turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, the weight of his words and the memory of his touch settling around me like a warm cloak. I looked down at my hand, where his had rested, still feeling the phantom imprint. It wasn't just math, not anymore. It was empathy, connection, a glimpse into a vulnerability that drew me in even deeper. The coordinates were definitely shifting. The lines between tutor and student were blurring, replaced by something much more complex, much more human, and infinitely more captivating. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was falling, slowly and irrevocably, for Liam. And the unsettling, exhilarating feeling was that he just might be falling too. The next session, whenever it would be, held a promise of not just further mathematical exploration, but something far more personal, something that felt both terrifying and utterly, beautifully right. The air in Julian's apartment, usually so crisp with the scent of old books and something faintly citrusy from a diffuser, had started to feel thick with an unspoken energy. It wasn't just the late summer heat seeping through the windows, it was us, or more accurately, it was me, thrumming with a nervous intensity that made focusing on quadratic equations feel like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Every time Julian leaned over to point at a particular line in my notebook, his arm brushing mine, a jolt would shoot through me, completely derailing my train of thought. My concentration, once so laser-focused under his guidance, now fractured into a million shimmering pieces whenever he was close. I was getting worse at hiding it, too. My cheeks would flush, my breath would catch, and I'd find myself staring at his hands, long, slender fingers that moved with such grace whether they were holding a pen or gesturing emphatically to explain a concept. He always smelled faintly of something warm and comforting, like spiced tea, and I'd often find myself taking a deeper breath when he was near, trying to inhale every particle of him. It was ridiculous, frankly. I was supposed to be learning calculus, not falling deeper into this utterly bewildering, intoxicating mess of feelings. Julian, to his credit, was a master of subtle cues. He'd often pause, his gaze softening, asking if I was feeling all right or if my mind was elsewhere. He never pushed, never pried, just offered a gentle opening. And I, being the coward I was, always mumbled something about a late night studying for another class or a looming deadline for a literature essay. He'd nod, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, and we'd dive back into the numbers. But the cracks in my facade were widening. One particularly sweltering Tuesday, we were wrestling with some truly mind-bending integrals. My brain felt like it was melting, and my frustration was palpable. I kept making silly mistakes, mixing up my beans, dropping exponents. After my third consecutive error on a problem I'd usually ace, I slammed my pen down on the table, a pathetic, defeated sound echoing in the quiet room. "This is useless," I sighed, running a hand through my already messy hair. "I can't focus today, Julian. My brain just isn't cooperating." He didn't chide me, didn't even look disappointed. Instead, he just chuckled softly, a sound that always managed to soothe something knotted inside me. "Take a break, Alexander. You're pushing yourself too hard. And frankly," he added, glancing at the clock on the wall, "we've been at this for almost 3 hours straight. Even my brain is starting to feel a little fried." He rose from his chair, stretching languidly, and I couldn't help but follow the lines of his body, the way his shirt pulled taut across his shoulders. He walked over to the small kitchenette area, opening the refrigerator. "Water? Or something colder? I think I have some iced tea left over from breakfast." "Iced tea sounds amazing," I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. He poured 2 tall glasses, the clinking of ice cubes a welcome distraction from the buzzing in my head. When he handed me a glass, our fingers brushed, and that familiar spark arced between us. This time, it felt like more than just a fleeting current. It felt like a silent conversation, a question and an answer hanging in the air. He went back to his chair, but instead of immediately diving back into math, he just sat there, nursing his tea, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. The silence wasn't awkward, not with Julian. It was full, expectant, maybe. "What's really on your mind, Alexander?" he asked, his voice low, breaking the quiet spell. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt the weight of his attention nonetheless. It's clearly not just the integrals. I hesitated, swirling the ice in my glass. This was it. The moment I'd both dreaded and longed for. How much could I say without sounding completely insane? How much could I reveal without sending him running for the hills? "It's a lot," I started, choosing my words carefully. "Just the usual stress of university, I guess, trying to keep everything balanced. Sometimes it feels like there's too much to juggle." He finally turned to me then, his eyes, those captivating hazel eyes, searching mine. "That's a perfectly normal feeling," he said, his voice gentle. "University can be overwhelming. But is there something specific that's weighing you down? Because lately I've noticed a shift. You seem distracted, like you're carrying something heavy." His empathy was disarming. It felt like he saw right through my flimsy excuses, straight into the chaotic landscape of my heart. I wanted to tell him everything, spill out the torrent of feelings that had been building for weeks, but fear held my tongue. What if I ruined this? What if admitting how I felt about him irrevocably altered the dynamic, pushing him away? "It's complicated," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression unreadable, but attentive. Life often is, he murmured. But sometimes, sharing the complication makes it a little less heavy. You don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable with, of course, but you know I'm here to listen, Alexander, not just about math. His words, not just about math, hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was like he was explicitly acknowledging the unspoken, drawing a line in the sand of our professional relationship, inviting me to cross it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It's about connection, I guess, or the lack of it sometimes. And then, sometimes, the surprising appearance of it when you least expect it. I risked a glance at him, and his expression was still. He was listening, truly listening. I've never really felt like I fit in. Not perfectly. I have friends, of course, but it's always felt like there's a part of me that's just different and lonely in a way, even when I'm surrounded by people. I paused, gathering courage. And then, coming here, to these sessions, it's been different with you. You see things. You understand things, even when I'm not saying them. It's more than just learning math, Julian. It's felt like learning about myself, too, and about what it feels like to truly connect with someone. I finished, my gaze dropping to my hands, which were now gripping the cold glass as if it were a lifeline. I'd said it. Not explicitly, not the full, raw truth of my longing for him, but enough, I hoped, for him to understand the depth of my gratitude, the burgeoning affection that was threatening to consume me. The silence that followed, stretched, taut, and shimmering. I didn't dare look up. What would he say? Would he laugh? Would he politely remind me that he was my tutor? Would he put up a wall? Then I heard him shift in his chair. Alexander, he said, his voice soft, almost a caress. That's one of the most honest things anyone has said to me in a long time. I finally lifted my eyes, meeting his. His gaze was warm, gentle, and something else. A flicker of understanding, perhaps even a shared vulnerability. I know what you mean, he continued, his voice now a little huskier. That feeling of being an outsider, even when you're not. It's a profound loneliness. And finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, can be transformative. He leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his iced tea. I've felt that too. More than you know, actually. Life as an academic sometimes can be isolating. You spend so much time in your own head, in your own research, that you forget to connect with the world outside. And finding a connection, a real one, it's rare. It's precious. His admission, his sharing of his own loneliness, completely disarmed me. It wasn't just me. He understood. He felt it too. It was like a door I hadn't known was there suddenly creaked open, revealing a hidden pathway between us. I'm glad you feel that way, I managed, a lightness spreading through my chest. About finding a connection, I mean. He smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. Me too, Alexander. Me too. He paused, then his gaze intensified. And I hope you know that I value our sessions for more than just your mathematical progress. I enjoy our conversations. I enjoy your perspective. You're a very insightful young man. My cheeks warmed at his praise. It felt different now, more personal. Less about my academic potential and more about my character, my essence. We sat there for a few more minutes, just drinking our tea, the math problems completely forgotten. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, bathing everything in a warm, golden glow. It felt like time had stopped, just for us. Finally, he clapped his hands softly. All right, enough existential reflection for one afternoon. How about we call it a day on the integrals and maybe look at some series instead? Or, if you're completely fried, we can just wrap up. I don't want to overload you. No, I'm good, I said quickly, surprising myself. A moment ago, I'd been ready to bolt. Now I wanted to prolong our time together, whatever the pretext. Let's do series. It's a different kind of brain exercise. He chuckled, and we moved back to the desk. But the atmosphere was fundamentally altered. The boundaries, while still technically present, felt softer, more yielding. Our conversation was interspersed with more personal anecdotes, lighthearted observations about university life, even a shared laugh about a particularly terrible lecturer. When he leaned in to show me a convergence test, his hand lingered for a fraction of a second longer on my arm, and I didn't pull away. I leaned into it, subtly, infinitesimally, hoping he felt it. The next few weeks became a series of these quiet, profound shifts. Each tutoring session became less about the strict confines of numbers and more about the evolving equation of our connection. We started extending our sessions, often losing track of time, only realizing it was late when the streetlights outside began to flicker on. Sometimes Julian would make us a light dinner, a simple pasta dish or a hearty soup, insisting that I couldn't study on an empty stomach. Those dinners, sitting across from him at his small kitchen table, felt more intimate than any official tutoring. We'd talk about everything: books we were reading, films we'd seen, our childhoods, our dreams, the future. One evening, we were discussing our favorite authors. I mentioned a lesser-known poet whose work I adored, a collection of verses that delved into themes of longing and unspoken desire. Julian's eyes lit up. "Oh, I know them," he exclaimed, pushing himself away from the table. "I have a first edition somewhere. Let me see if I can find it." He disappeared into his study, and I heard the rustling of papers, the soft thud of books being moved. A few minutes later, he emerged, a slim, well-worn volume in his hand. "Here it is," he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "I haven't looked at this in years." He sat down next to me on the sofa, opening the book carefully. "Do you have a favorite poem from the collection?" I told him the one that always resonated most deeply with me, a particularly poignant piece about the quiet ache of unrequited love. He found the page, and as he read the opening lines aloud, his voice low and resonant, I felt a shiver run down my spine. He read with such feeling, such understanding, as if the words were his own. His eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were softened by the poetry, reflecting the yearning on the page. As he read the final lines, his voice barely above a whisper, he looked up, his gaze meeting mine. The air crackled with an intensity that was almost unbearable. His eyes held mine, searching, questioning, and for a fleeting moment, I felt like he saw every raw, exposed feeling swirling inside me. The unspoken words of the poem seemed to hang between us, articulating the very emotions I was too afraid to voice. He closed the book slowly, his fingers tracing the worn cover. "It's a powerful piece," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "To love so deeply, so silently." "Yes," I agreed, my own voice tight. "To carry that kind of unspoken truth." He nodded, still holding my gaze. The silence stretched, loaded with meaning. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, where our knees were almost touching. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. This was it, I thought. This was the precipice. One of us had to say something, or do something. My eyes dropped to his lips, slightly parted, and a sudden, undeniable urge surged through me. I wanted to lean in, to close the small distance between us, to finally taste those lips that had spoken so many mathematical truths and now poetic confessions. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, an inevitable conclusion to weeks of building tension. Just as I started to tilt my head to make that brave, terrifying move, the sharp, insistent ring of his doorbell shattered the moment. We both jumped, startled, breaking eye contact. The spell was broken, brutally, abruptly. Julian blinked, as if coming out of a trance, and then a small, almost imperceptible flush rose on his cheeks. He cleared his throat, pushing himself up. "Looks like Looks like my neighbor, probably. Forgot to pick up a package, I think. He walked to the door, and I sat there, heart still racing, a whirlwind of frustration and disappointment swirling inside me. So close. We had been so achingly close, and now the moment was gone. When Julian returned a few minutes later, he seemed a little more guarded, a subtle barrier back in place. He looked at the clock. Well, Alexander, look at the time. We've really gone overtime today. I think you've definitely earned a break. His voice was friendly, professional, but the easy intimacy of moments before had vanished, replaced by a polite distance. My chest tightened. Had I misread everything? Had he felt nothing? Or had he felt it, and the interruption had served as a convenient escape? I gathered my books, a heavy weight settling in my stomach. Right. Yes, thank you, Julian, for everything. He walked me to the door, a small smile on his face. Always a pleasure, Alexander. Try to get some rest. And remember what we discussed about the geometric series, okay? I nodded, managed a weak smile, and walked out into the cool night air, feeling more lost and confused than ever. The fresh air didn't clear my head. It just made the ache in my chest feel sharper. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I replayed the entire evening in my head, every glance, every word, every subtle shift in his expression. Had I imagined the connection? Had the poem and the quiet intimacy of the room simply amplified my own desires, making me see something that wasn't there? The almost kiss haunted me, a phantom sensation on my lips. The next few sessions were different. A subtle awkwardness permeated the air. Julian was still kind, still patient, but there was a palpable sense of restraint. He stuck more rigidly to the math, kept the conversations focused, and seemed to subtly avoid prolonged eye contact. It felt like a deliberate reestablishment of boundaries, a gentle but firm push back into the tutor-student dynamic. And it hurt. It hurt more than I could have imagined. I had gotten used to the loosening of the reins, the burgeoning closeness. And now to have it pulled back felt like a betrayal, even though he hadn't promised me anything. My grades in math, ironically, started to improve significantly. With my emotional focus diverted, I poured all my anxious energy into the equations. But the satisfaction was hollow. The real equation I wanted to solve was the one between Julian and me, and that one seemed to be slipping further and further out of my grasp. One afternoon, after a particularly quiet and efficient session where we'd barely deviated from the textbook, I couldn't take it anymore. As I packed my bag, Julian stood by the window, looking out, his back to me. "Julian?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. He turned, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Alexander? Are things all right? Between us, I mean?" He hesitated, his gaze sweeping over my face, lingering for a moment before dropping to his hands. "Of course, Alexander," he said, his voice calm, perhaps a little too calm. "Why wouldn't they be?" "It just feels different," I confessed, unable to hold back the truth anymore. Since that night we talked about the poem, it feels like you've pulled away, like I said something wrong." He sighed, a soft, weary sound. He walked back to the table, leaning against it, his arms crossed. "Alexander, you didn't say anything wrong. Not at all. What you shared was profound, and I appreciated your honesty, truly." He paused, then looked directly at me, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. Concern, regret, maybe a hint of something else. But sometimes, when we're in certain roles, it's important to maintain certain professional boundaries, for both our sakes. My heart sank. So he had felt it. He was pulling away, and it was because of the boundaries. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "So you're saying what we talked about, what we shared, that was a mistake?" "No!" he said, his voice sharper than usual, a flicker of emotion breaking through his controlled facade. He immediately softened it. "No, Alexander, it wasn't a mistake. Not at all, but it complicated things. For me, and I imagine for you too." He pushed himself off the table, taking a step towards me, then stopped, maintaining a careful distance. Look, Alexander, I value you. As a student, yes, but also as a person. I enjoy our time together more than I probably should, given my position. His voice was low, almost a whisper, and I had to strain to hear him. And that's why I need to be careful. My priority, my responsibility, is to your education, to helping you succeed, and I don't want anything to compromise that. He was telling me, in the kindest possible way, that he couldn't reciprocate, or wouldn't. That our connection, while acknowledged, was too dangerous to pursue. The logical part of my brain understood. The aching, hopeful part of my heart felt shattered. I understand, I said, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. I didn't. Not really. Not completely. I understood the words, but not the emotions behind them, not the sudden wall he was erecting. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment, then dropped it. Do you, though? Really? His gaze was intense, searching. Because I have a feeling you're still trying to solve an equation that isn't meant for a simple numerical answer. His words, an equation that isn't meant for a simple numerical answer, resonated deeply, a painful echo of the chapter title I'd unknowingly named in my mind. He saw it all, he understood, and he was choosing to put distance between us. Maybe, I admitted, looking away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. The air between us was thick with unspoken truths and unresolved longing. Maybe I am. I gathered the last of my things, a heavy silence falling once more. I knew then that things wouldn't go back to the way they were before. The innocence of the early tutoring sessions, the slow, organic unfolding of our connection, was gone. Now there was awareness, acknowledgement, and a deliberate, heartbreaking choice to pull back. As I left his apartment that day, the late afternoon sun felt cold on my face. The mathematical equations still seemed bewildering, but they paled in comparison to the complex, agonizing equation of my feelings for Julian, an equation that had no easy solution, and one that I now suspected might never truly be solved. The door closed softly behind me, leaving me alone with the weight of what had been said, and the deafening silence of what had not. My tutor had shown me more than just math, indeed. He had shown me the exhilarating, terrifying complexity of my own heart, and the profound ache of a connection that felt destined to remain just out of reach. The world felt different, not in a dramatic movie montage kind of way, but subtler, like someone had finally adjusted the focus on my life, bringing everything into crisp, clear relief. The confession Julian and I shared, the tentative electric touch of our hands, had unlocked something within me I hadn't even realized was caged. It wasn't just about Julian anymore. It was about me, Alexander, finally stepping into a truth I'd been circling for years. We stood there for what felt like an eternity after that moment, his fingers still laced with mine, a quiet warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the summer air. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, full of unspoken questions and burgeoning possibilities. I remember catching his eye, and the sheer relief I saw there mirrored my own. It was like we'd both been holding our breath, and now, finally, we could exhale. So, Julian started, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. Math is definitely off the table for tonight. He gave a small, wry smile, and I laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that felt good to hear. Good, I said, squeezing his hand gently, because my brain feels completely full, and it's not with quadratic equations. He chuckled, and the sound was like music. Mine either. I think we need to talk, Alexander, properly. I nodded, my heart thumping a hopeful rhythm against my ribs. Yeah, I think we do. We decided to go to a small, quiet cafe a few blocks away, the kind with soft lighting and worn armchairs where people nursed lattes and actually read books. It felt like the perfect setting for a conversation that would undoubtedly redefine everything. Sitting across from him, the small wooden table between us suddenly felt like both a barrier and a grounding point. My coffee arrived, steaming gently, but I barely registered its scent. All my senses were tuned to Julian. "Alexander," he began, his gaze steady and intense, "I need to be absolutely clear about something. My role as your tutor, it complicated things immensely, and it was never my intention to make you feel any pressure or to cross any lines while that was still the primary dynamic." My stomach tightened slightly. I understood his concern. "Julian, I know, I really do. You never did anything to pressure me. If anything, I was the one who probably blurred the lines a little, in my head, at least." I took a breath. "But the truth is, my feelings for you developed outside of the algebra problems. They just grew. And I think even if you hadn't been my tutor, I would have found a way to be around you, to get to know you." He offered a soft smile, a hint of relief in his eyes. "That means a lot to hear. I've been wrestling with this for weeks, worried about the ethics of it all, but I couldn't deny what I felt either, not anymore." He leaned forward slightly. "So for the record, your tutoring sessions are officially concluded. You don't need my help with calculus anymore. You've more than proven you can handle it. And I wouldn't feel right continuing in that capacity, knowing what we've just admitted." I felt a surge of warmth. It was the right thing to do, of course, but hearing him say it, seeing the integrity in his eyes, solidified my respect for him even further. "I understand," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "And honestly, I think I've learned more from you than just math equations anyway." The double meaning hung in the air, light and teasing, and he laughed softly. "I hope so," he murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "So what now, Alexander? We're here, in this new space." My heart swelled with a feeling of exhilarating uncertainty. "I don't know," I admitted, a little breathless, "but I want to explore it. With you, if you're willing." "More than willing," he confirmed, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "But we need to be smart about this, both for your academic reputation and for my professional one. We've kept this quiet, and I think that's been for the best. For now, at least." I nodded, thinking about my parents, my friends. My stomach did another little flip. This was going to be a big deal. "Right, so, secret relationship?" He considered it. "Not exactly secret, but perhaps discreet. While you're still so heavily involved with the university, and while I'm still on staff, it's just wise to proceed with a certain level of caution. We build this, Alexander, we build it properly, without inviting unnecessary scrutiny or judgment from people who might not understand." It made sense. A relationship born out of something unconventional might draw unwanted attention, and neither of us needed that. "Okay," I agreed. "Discreet. I can do discreet." My heart, however, was anything but. It was singing. Over the next few weeks, discreet became our comfortable rhythm. Our dates weren't grand, public spectacles, but intimate, stolen moments that felt all the more precious for their quiet privacy. We explored hidden corners of the city, went on long walks in the botanical gardens, cooked dinners together at his apartment, or sometimes mine when my roommates were out. We talked for hours, sometimes until the sky outside the window began to lighten, sharing stories from our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. I learned about Julian's love for old jazz records, his slightly obsessive neatness, and a surprisingly endearing habit of talking to his plants. He, in turn, learned about my ambition to travel the world, my slightly chaotic approach to laundry, and my deep-seated fear of public speaking, despite being generally outgoing. These were the moments that truly built the foundation, laying brick by brick the structure of our shared understanding. It wasn't just the intense physical attraction, which was undeniably there, simmering beneath every touch and glance. It was the profound connection of two minds and hearts, finding solace and excitement in each other. One evening, we were at his apartment, cooking pasta. The scent of garlic and basil filled the air, and a Miles Davis record spun softly on his turntable. I was chopping tomatoes, trying to be helpful, and Julian was stirring the sauce, his back to me. "Julian," I started, my voice a little softer than I intended. He hummed, turning to look at me, a question in his eyes. "What was it like for you when you realized you liked guys?" The question had been rattling around in my head for a while. For me, it had been a slow, dawning realization, punctuated by the undeniable pull towards him. But I was still young, still figuring things out. He had more life experience. He paused, spatula midair. He looked thoughtful, then leaned against the counter, facing me fully. "It wasn't a single eureka moment, Alexander. It was more like a growing awareness. For a long time, I just felt different, disconnected from the conversations my friends were having about girls. I liked the friendships, but the romantic interest just wasn't there." He looked down at his hands, then back at me. Then, in my early 20s, I met someone, and everything just clicked. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like a puzzle piece finally finding its home. It brought a lot of clarity, but also a lot of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of disappointing my family, fear of a world that wasn't always kind to people like us. "How did you deal with that?" I asked, leaning against my own counter, my knife forgotten. He sighed, a long, deep breath, slowly, carefully. "I came out to a few trusted friends first, and their acceptance gave me the courage to tell my sister. She was incredible. My parents, that took longer. It wasn't outright rejection, more like a quiet, uncomfortable silence for a while. But eventually, they came around. It's still not something we talk about openly all the time, but they see my happiness, and that's enough for me." He paused. "Why do you ask?" I fidgeted with a tomato. "Just wondering. My parents, they're wonderful, but I haven't told them anything like this, ever. I don't know how they'd react. It's scary." He walked over to me, gently taking the knife from my hand and placing it on the cutting board. He then took my hands in his. "It is scary, Alexander, and you don't have to do anything until you're ready. There's no timeline for these things, but know this." He looked into my eyes, his grip firm and reassuring. "Whenever you decide to, I'll be right here. Whatever support you need, I'll give it to you. You're not alone in this." His words were a balm to a part of me I hadn't realized was so anxious. I felt a surge of love, pure and overwhelming, for this man who saw me, truly saw me, and offered unconditional support. I leaned in, resting my forehead against his shoulder, inhaling the comforting scent of him. "Thank you, Julian," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "That means everything." The conversation deepened our connection, moving us beyond the initial thrill of new love into a space of shared vulnerability and trust. It felt like we were building something robust, something meant to last. Weeks turned into a couple of months. My final exams arrived, and I aced calculus, a testament not just to Julian's excellent tutoring, but to my newfound focus and confidence. Knowing he was there, a steady presence in my life, gave me an anchor. We celebrated my academic success over a quiet dinner, him beaming with pride. With summer officially beginning, the pressure of my studies lifted, and our relationship could finally breathe a little more. We decided it was time to introduce each other to a select few friends. For me, that meant my best friend Chloe, who knew everything about me. I'd hinted at a new person in my life, a he, and she was practically vibrating with curiosity. "So spill, Alex, who is he? What's he like? Is he hot? Don't hold back," she demanded over text. I laughed, a little nervous. "You'll see. We're meeting for drinks on Friday." Friday evening arrived, and I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Julian was calm, as always, radiating a quiet confidence that was both reassuring and slightly intimidating. We met Chloe at a bustling pub downtown. "Chloe, this is Julian," I said, my voice a little too bright. "Julian, this is Chloe, my partner in crime since kindergarten." Chloe, ever the charmer, instantly softened, her sharp gaze assessing Julian. She offered him a warm smile. "It's so good to finally meet you. Alex has been notoriously tight-lipped." Julian's smile was genuine. "It's a pleasure, Chloe. I've heard a lot about you." The initial awkwardness quickly dissipated. Chloe, despite her initial inquisitiveness, was perceptive and kind. She saw the way Julian looked at me, the subtle touches, the easy banter that flowed between us. She asked Julian about his work, his hobbies, treating him not just as Alex's new boyfriend, but as a person worthy of her attention. Julian, in turn, was charming, engaging, and patient. By the end of the evening, Chloe was giving me a knowing look over the rim of her beer glass, a silent stamp of approval. Later, walking home, Chloe hooked her arm through mine. "Okay, Alex, he's lovely, really lovely, and totally smitten with you, by the way. I saw it." She paused. "But he looks a little older than you, and you never mentioned how you met." My stomach tightened again. "Yeah, he is a bit older, and we met through tutoring." I braced myself for her reaction. Chloe raised an eyebrow, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Tutoring? Like he tutored you for math?" I nodded, feeling my cheeks flush. "Yeah, calculus." She was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her brain whirring. "Okay," she said slowly. "That's unconventional. A little spicy, even. But Alex, you seem genuinely happy. Andy seems really good for you. He's got that calm, intelligent vibe. Just be careful, okay? Make sure you're always on the same page." Her acceptance, even with a touch of caution, was a huge relief. "We are, Chloe. We've talked about all of it. He finished tutoring me, obviously, before anything really started. We're being careful." She squeezed my arm. "Good. Because you deserve to be happy, Alex. And if he's the one making you that happy, then I'm all for it." Julian's friends were equally welcoming, though perhaps a little less probing. They were mostly people his age, professionals, and they seemed genuinely pleased to see him so content. It felt good to be integrated into his world, to see him in different contexts, laughing with his friends, discussing current events with a passion I hadn't witnessed before. It cemented the reality of our relationship beyond the bubble of our private moments. As the summer wore on, our bond deepened further. We took a short road trip to the coast, renting a small cottage near the beach. It was our first extended time living together, and it was glorious. We spent our days walking along the shore, reading side by side, cooking simple meals, and just existing together. It was during this trip that the nuances of our connection really came into play. One evening, after watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, we sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a single blanket, the sound of the waves a constant lullaby. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling completely at peace. "Julian," I said softly, "do you ever worry about us? The age difference? How we met?" He paused, stroking my hair gently. "Of course I do, Alexander. Anyone would. It's not the conventional path, but then I look at you and I feel this profound sense of rightness. And those worries fade. They don't disappear entirely, but they become background noise. What matters is what we have here between us. The respect, the affection, the genuine joy we find in each other's company." He tilted my chin up, his gaze earnest. "I made a promise to myself, a long time ago, that I would always strive for honesty and integrity in my life. And what I feel for you, what we share, feels like the most honest thing I've ever experienced. It's not about ticking boxes or following societal expectations. It's about building a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. And you, Alexander, make my life feel more fulfilling than I ever thought possible." My chest tightened with emotion. His words were a mirror to my own feelings. "You do that for me too, Julian," I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. "You opened my eyes to so much, not just in math, but in myself. You made me braver, more confident in who I am." He kissed my forehead, a tender, lingering kiss. "You were always brave, Alexander. I just helped you see it." That night, lying in bed, the waves crashing softly outside, we talked about the future. Not just the immediate future, but the big, scary, exciting one. My university plans, his career trajectory. It felt incredibly natural to weave our individual ambitions into a shared tapestry. I want to do a semester abroad, I confessed, feeling a little trepidation. It was a long-held dream, but now, with Julian, the thought of being apart for months felt daunting. He listened patiently, his hand tracing patterns on my arm. "That's a fantastic idea, Alexander. You absolutely should. Where were you thinking?" "London, maybe, or Berlin. Both excellent choices. Think of all the history, the culture, the experiences you'll have." He paused. "And yes, it'll be tough. But absence, as they say, makes the heart grow fonder. We'll make it work. Regular video calls, letters, maybe I could even visit for a week or two, if my schedule allows." His immediate support, rather than any hint of resentment or possessiveness, filled me with an even deeper love. He wasn't trying to hold me back, he was encouraging me to soar while promising to be there when I landed. "And what about you, Julian?" I asked. "Are you happy in your current role at the university? What are your dreams?" He smiled, a thoughtful, distant look in his eyes. "I do enjoy teaching, connecting with young minds, guiding them. There's a satisfaction in that. But I've always harbored a desire to delve deeper into research, perhaps pursue a long-term project I've been sketching out in my mind for years." "What kind of project?" I asked, intrigued. "Something in theoretical mathematics, applied to socioeconomic patterns. Trying to model. Well, it's complicated, and probably incredibly dull to anyone but me," he chuckled. "No, it's not," I insisted. "Tell me, I want to know everything about it." And I did. I found myself genuinely fascinated as he explained the intricate theories, the potential applications. His passion was infectious. Our conversation about our individual futures slowly began to blend into a discussion of our shared future. Living together, eventually. The kind of home we might build, the possibility of travel, of continuing to explore the world hand in hand. It felt less like sketching plans and more like a gentle, natural unfolding. We weren't rushing anything, just allowing our desires to align. Life, however, rarely remains perfectly serene. The first real challenge to our quiet equilibrium came, as it often does, from an unexpected quarter. My parents. I had put off telling them for as long as I could, but the guilt was starting to gnaw at me. I was spending more and more time with Julian, and fabricating excuses was becoming increasingly difficult. Moreover, it felt disrespectful to Julian, to our relationship, to keep him completely hidden from the most important people in my life. I chose a Sunday dinner. My mother had made her famous roast chicken, and the atmosphere was usually relaxed and warm. My heart was pounding, though. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice a little shaky, cutting through a lull in conversation, "there's something I need to tell you." They both looked at me, my mom with a gentle smile, my dad with his usual steady, expectant gaze. I'm seeing someone," I continued, trying to keep my voice even. "His name is Julian, and he's a man." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father simply stared at me, his expression unreadable. "A man?" my mother finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at my father, then back at me. "Alexander, are you serious?" "Yes, Mom, I'm serious," I affirmed, trying to sound confident, despite the tremor in my hands beneath the table. "I'm gay, and I'm in love with Julian." My father cleared his throat, a deep, rumbling sound that always preceded a serious pronouncement. "Alexander," he said, his voice measured. This is a surprise, a considerable surprise." "I know," I said, looking down at my plate, then back up at them, meeting their eyes. "I know it might be, but it's who I am. And Julian? He's wonderful. He's kind and brilliant, and he makes me incredibly happy." My mother started to cry soft, silent tears. It wasn't accusatory, but it broke my heart to see her distress. We just, we had so many dreams for you, Alexander. A family, a wife. Mom, I said, my own voice cracking, I can still have a family. It just might look a little different than you imagined. My father, bless his pragmatic heart, seemed to recover first. How did you meet him? He asked, his tone still guarded but less emotional than my mother's. I decided to be honest, but gentle. He was my math tutor initially, but we stopped the tutoring before anything romantic developed. We were both very careful about that. This detail seemed to give them even more pause. The idea of an older man, a former tutor, probably didn't sit well with their traditional sensibilities. My father's brow furrowed. So he's older? Yes, I admitted. By a few years? The conversation that followed was difficult. It wasn't a scene of outright condemnation, but more of a bewildered confusion, a struggle to reconcile the Alexander they thought they knew with the one sitting before them. My mother expressed worries about my happiness, about society's acceptance. My father worried about my choices, about the perception. I held my ground, gently but firmly. I explained my feelings, the depth of my connection with Julian. I reassured them that I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in a long time. It took hours, punctuated by silences, by my mother's occasional sniffles, and my father's quiet, searching questions. When I finally left their house, the air felt heavy and my head ached. I called Julian from the car, my voice trembling. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "It was rough, Julian," I confessed, tears finally escaping. They were surprised, and my mom cried. My dad, he asked a lot of questions. About you, about how we met. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't easy. "Oh, Alexander," he said softly. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Come over. Right now." I drove straight to his apartment, and the moment he opened the door, I fell into his arms, burying my face in his chest. He held me tightly, stroking my hair, letting me simply be. He didn't offer immediate advice or try to fix it. He just offered comfort, presence, and unwavering support. Later, curled up on his sofa, a mug of warm tea in my hands, I felt a familiar sense of calm return. "Thank you for just being here," I mumbled into his shirt. "Always," he replied, kissing the top of my head. "It's a process, Alexander. And it's your process. They love you. It might take time for them to understand, to adjust, but they will. And if they don't, then that's on them, not on you. You're living your truth, and that's what matters." His words were a powerful affirmation. He didn't try to minimize my pain, but he also didn't let me wallow in it. He helped me see the long game, the bigger picture. Over the next few months, things with my parents remained a little strained. Calls were less frequent, visits more formal. But gradually, slowly, there was a thaw. My mother started asking about Julian, tentatively at first, then with more genuine curiosity. My father, ever practical, asked about his work, his background. It wasn't a complete acceptance, not yet, but it was progress. One afternoon, my mother called, her voice lighter than it had been in a while. "Alexander," she said, "I was thinking, maybe Julian could come for dinner next month? Just a casual thing." My heart soared. "Really, Mom? Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, a small sigh escaping her. "I want to meet him properly. I want to see this happiness you talk about." I nearly cried with relief. "He'd love that, Mom. He really would." Julian, when I told him, was calm but visibly pleased. "That's wonderful, Alexander. A big step. Will make a good impression." And he did. Julian, with his quiet charm, his intelligent conversation, and his obvious devotion to me, began to win them over. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but by the end of the evening, the stiffness had eased. My mother actually laughed at one of Julian's dry witticisms, and my father found common ground discussing politics and current events. As we were leaving, my mother hugged me tightly, then surprised us both by extending her hand to Julian. "It was lovely to finally meet you, Julian," she said, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you for making our son so happy." Julian squeezed her hand gently. "The pleasure was all mine, Mrs. Davies, and Alexander makes me very happy too." Walking out to the car under the soft glow of the streetlights, I felt an incredible lightness, like a huge weight had been lifted. I turned to Julian, a wide smile on my face. "They liked you." He smiled back, a warm, contented expression. "I think they did. Or at least, they're willing to give us a chance. And that's more than enough for now." That moment felt like a turning point. The last major hurdle had been cleared, not perfectly, but successfully enough to pave the way for a more open future. My semester abroad in London was fantastic, filled with new experiences, but also punctuated by daily video calls with Julian, shared stories, and the comforting knowledge that he was waiting for me. He even managed to visit for a week, and exploring London with him, seeing his delight in the museums and historical sites, made the city feel even more magical. When I returned, our reunion at the airport was a whirlwind of hugs and kisses, a public display of affection I wouldn't have dreamed of months ago. It felt liberating. My parents even came to pick me up, and seeing them greet Julian with genuine warmth, a comfortable camaraderie, filled me with a profound sense of gratitude. Life with Julian settled into a beautiful rhythm. We found an apartment together a year after I graduated, a cozy place with big windows and a small balcony, perfect for morning coffee. I landed a job in a tech startup, applying my analytical skills in a field I loved. Julian continued his research, his passion projects slowly gaining recognition, leading to invitations to conferences and guest lectures. We were building our shared horizon, brick by brick, dream by dream. It wasn't a life free of challenges, career pressures, minor disagreements, the occasional judgmental glance from strangers, but we faced them together, always leaning on each other. One quiet Sunday morning, we were having breakfast on our balcony. The sun was warm on my face, and Julian was across from me, sipping his coffee, engrossed in a scientific journal. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and my heart swelled with an emotion so deep, so profound, it transcended words. He looked up, catching my gaze. "Everything okay?" he asked, a gentle smile playing on his lips. I reached across the table, taking his hand. His fingers, those same fingers that once patiently guided mine through complex equations, now fit perfectly with my own. "More than okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Just grateful." He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with understanding. "Me too, Alexander, every single day." It wasn't just math that Julian had tutored me in. He had tutored me in life, in love, in self-acceptance. He had shown me that the most complex equations weren't found in textbooks, but in the intricate dance of human connection, in the courage to love openly, and in the joy of building a future with the person who truly sees you. Our story was still being written, a beautiful, ongoing narrative, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that every chapter would be an adventure I wanted to share with him forever.